Nobody in Aldermere expected the quietest woman in the palace to walk away with the most important seat in the kingdom. For 30 years, the court had known exactly who stood where, who sat beside the king, whose name came first, whose face filled the frame. There were rules older than the throne itself about these things. And yet, on one gray afternoon inside the great portrait hall, in front of the royal painter, the cameras, and the entire senior court, one chair changed hands. No one shouted. No one was pushed. It happened in the space of a single breath, a soft step forward, a small turn of the shoulder, and by the time anyone realized what they were watching, it was already done. This is the story of how Duchess Alara took the one place she was never meant to take, and why not a single person in that room dared to stop her. The morning of the official portrait began like any other grand occasion inside the Palace of Aldermere. Servants moved through the long corridors carrying pressed robes and polished silver. The great portrait hall, used only for the most important royal images, had been prepared for weeks. Its tall windows were cleaned until they shone, and the famous velvet chair, the one reserved for the person who sat closest to the king, was placed in the very center of the room. That chair belonged, by every rule of the court, to Queen Consort Adelaide. She had held her position for many years. She was calm, careful, and used to being the woman at the king's side in every painting that would one day hang in the palace halls. To her, this day was simply another duty, one more portrait among the many she had already sat for. But this year, something in the palace felt different, though few could say exactly what. Whispers had been moving quietly through the court for months. They spoke of Duchess Alara, a gentle, well-liked woman married to the king's younger cousin. Alara rarely asked for attention. She smiled softly, spoke little, and always stood a step behind the more powerful figures of the court. The people, however, adored her. Letters arrived for her from every corner of the kingdom. Children waved at her in the streets. And slowly, without ever seeking it, she had become the most loved face in the royal family. King Rowan had noticed this too. He said nothing openly, but those close to him knew he had begun to value Alara's quiet steadiness in a way that surprised even himself. On the morning of the portrait, as the court gathered and took their places, no one yet understood that the balance of the room was about to shift, and that the velvet chair in the center would not stay where everyone expected. The senior members of the court entered the great portrait hall in careful order, just as tradition demanded. Queen Consort Adelaide arrived last, as was her right, dressed in deep blue with the royal sash across her shoulder. She moved toward the center of the room with the ease of someone who had done this 100 times before. Every eye followed her, and every servant lowered their gaze as she passed. Duchess Alara stood quietly near the side, exactly where she always placed herself. She wore a simple pale gown, elegant but not grand, and her hands were folded in front of her. She had assumed, like everyone else, that she would be seated somewhere near the edge of the painting, perhaps half hidden behind the taller figures of the court. She had made her peace with that long ago. She never expected more. The royal painter, an old and respected man named Master Havard, began arranging the family. He had painted 3 generations of Aldermere royals and knew the rules of rank better than anyone alive. He guided each person into place with soft words and gentle gestures, building the picture piece by piece. The king took his position at the heart of the scene, tall and still, waiting for the woman who would sit beside him. It was then that a small confusion entered the room. Master Havard, studying the light falling through the windows, paused. He looked at the empty velvet chair, then at the king, then slowly across the gathered faces. Something about the arrangement troubled his trained eye. The composition felt unbalanced. The king's expression, he noticed, softened only when his gaze drifted toward one particular figure standing off to the side. The painter hesitated. Then, almost without thinking, he lifted his hand and gestured, not toward the queen consort, but toward Duchess Alara. "Would you step forward, my lady?" he asked gently. "The light favors you." A hush fell over the hall. It was a simple request, spoken with no ill intent. Master Havard was thinking only of shadow and balance of the art in front of him, but everyone in that room understood at once that something unusual had just been set in motion. Alara froze. Adelaide's hand tightened at her side, and the king, saying nothing at all, watched to see what would happen next. For a long moment, Duchess Alara did not move. She looked toward Queen Consort Adelaide, silently asking permission, or perhaps hoping someone would correct the mistake. But no one spoke. The painter waited. The court held its breath, and the empty velvet chair sat in the center of the room like a question no one wanted to answer. Slowly, Alara stepped forward. Her feet made no sound on the polished floor. She did not stride toward the chair as if she owned it. She moved carefully, almost apologetically, as though she might turn back at any second. Yet with every step, the room seemed to lean toward her. The light from the windows caught her pale gown and lifted her out of the shadows where she had always stood. She reached the center and stopped beside the king. Master Havard nodded, pleased, still thinking only of his painting. But King Rowan turned his head and looked at Alara directly, a long, steady look that the whole court saw. Then, quietly, he gestured to the velvet chair. "Please," he said, "sit." The word landed softly, but it echoed. Adelaide stood only a few feet away, her face perfectly composed, though her eyes betrayed the shock beneath. By every rule she knew, that chair was hers. She could have spoken. She could have reminded the room of her rank with a single sentence. Every person present half expected her to do so. But she did not. Perhaps she saw the way the king looked at Alara. Perhaps she understood in that instant that the affection of the kingdom had already moved, and that fighting for a chair would only make its loss more public. Whatever the reason, Adelaide lowered her gaze, stepped back, and took a place among the standing figures at the side. Alara sat. Her hands rested in her lap, and though her heart pounded, her face remained calm and kind. Master Havard, sensing at last the weight of what had occurred, cleared his throat and quietly returned to his easel. The portrait, he decided, was now complete in its arrangement. For the rest of the sitting, no one said a word about the change. The court simply adjusted, the way water fills a new shape. And when the great doors finally opened and the family filed out, everyone in Aldermere already knew that a story had been born, one that would be told in whispers for years to come. The finished portrait was revealed to the kingdom 3 months later, unveiled in the grand hall where all royal images hung. Crowds gathered to see it. And there, at the center of the painting, seated beside King Rowan in the velvet chair, was Duchess Alara, calm, gentle, and unmistakably the woman closest to the throne. The people were not angry. If anything, they were delighted. The face they loved most now held the place of honor, and to them it felt right, as though the painting had simply caught up with what their hearts had already decided. Letters of praise flooded the palace. Alara's quiet dignity, they said, was exactly what a kingdom should treasure. Within the court, however, the meaning of that afternoon was understood more deeply. Everyone knew that a chair was never only a chair. Position, in a royal house, was power made visible. By stepping into that seat, Alara had not just changed a painting. She had changed where the eyes of the kingdom would rest for a generation to come. Queen Consort Adelaide accepted the shift with a grace that surprised many. In the weeks that followed, she never once spoke against Alara. She continued her duties, attended her events, and carried herself with the same steady poise she always had. Some believed she had lost something that day. Others thought she had shown her true strength by choosing not to fight a battle that could only wound the family she had served for so long. As for Alara, she never behaved as though she had won anything. She remained soft-spoken and humble, always careful to honor Adelaide in public, always quick to step aside in small matters even as she had stepped forward in a great one. That gentleness only made the people love her more. A leader who did not hunger for the seat, they said, was exactly the kind of person who deserved it. King Rowan never explained his decision. He did not have to. The portrait spoke for him, hanging in the great hall for all to see. A silent record of the day, the quietest woman in Aldermere took the most important place in the kingdom, and did it without raising her voice even once. Years later, guides who walked visitors through the palace would stop before that painting and tell the tale. They would point to the velvet chair, to the calm face of the woman seated in it, and explain that power in Aldermere had once changed hands in the space of a single, silent step. And every listener would leave the hall wondering the same thing. How much can truly change in one quiet moment, if only someone is brave enough to move?